Thank you, Nigel, and thank you, CEDA, for the opportunity, and thank you for the audience for actually listening to what I have to say. Minda is actually a $100 million business in this state, and it's been here for 120 years. I'm going to talk about the disability sector in the main, but I just wanted to set the scene. When people think of disability, and if you close your eyes and think about what your perception of disability is, 9 times out of 10 people perceive self-care or personal care or those sorts of services, but disability and autism support is so much more. We have a struggle attracting corporates into our organisation, and I'll talk a little bit about that in Workforce. But we have exactly the same sorts of divisions that business have: risk, quality, HR, finance, a whole range. But we employ 1,800 at Minda. We run 2 companies, Minda Housing and Minda Businesses, and we also, our supply chain is enormous, and most of those are SMEs in this state. We have a $98 million development at Bryden at the moment in partnership with Sarah Constructions, funded by Bank SA. So we have the local baker who brings the bread. We have the milkman, we have the newspaper delivery, we have Suez who do our waste management. We have a whole range of on-flow effects down the supply chain that is all about South Australians. So what I want to talk about in particular is how this sector has changed. The impact of the NDIS is enormous. If you can imagine, the way we worked in the past is it's a state government funded service where a number of people who were screamed the loudest managed to get services, and then the government would pay organisations like Minda a payment quarterly in advance. Now we have to deal with, the numbers in this book are 1,700. As of today, there's 1,800 customers at Minda. We have to deal with each one of those as a unique customer. So you can imagine the change to culture that has had. Over 1 in 5 people in Australia live with a disability of some sort. 90% of them are permanent. So everybody is touched by disability in some way. And so it requires support with self-care, mobility, integration into the community, communications, a whole lot of different services. So I guess what happened for us too, which is really, really important in this state, for the 53,000 still without jobs, is that in 2012 we had a couple of young people who decided from school they would come and work in the disability sector. They were mocked by their friends, saying, why would you go for a job there? And this is one of those girls. Now 10% of our workforce is what I call the millennials, which has again required a whole different structure that we have to provide. And these people, these young kids really, are fabulous workers, because in the community, when they take someone with autism out, they look no different to you and me. So it is changing so much, and this is probably, we've had 260% growth in this sort of work alone. So the NDIS was a brainchild in 2020, and the Productivity Commission announced that there would be an inquiry because it was a terrible, fragmented, broken system where people had to queue for services, and most people didn't have any services, so the waiting lists for anything was terrible. So what we have now, and there were a number of trial sites. South Australia had the children's trial site, and what we've probably seen from around Australia, that all those that participated in the trial site, the scheme is completely different from when it was trialled. And so people that have transformed their organisations one way are now having to do 180 to change them again. It's going to be bigger than aged care. It's 22 billion and aged care is about 21 billion. So it's a huge change. It's a doubling in this state. There's about 740 million spent on disability at the moment. It will go to 1.5 by next year. And that, of course, means a doubling in the number of people supported or number of supports they're getting, and also about an additional 6,000 workforce that's required. Not just support workers, but also allied health and corporate staff. What is it about? It's about giving people with disability an ordinary life, providing reasonable and necessary supports. So it's not all things. So organisations like Minda want to give people a great life. And so what we do is we rely on our corporate sponsors and our sponsorship dollars, our land investments, our investment portfolio to actually provide those things that the NDIS won't fund. So again, there are additional services in this state that will be provided, not just through the NDIS dollar. We're now having to adopt a market-based approach. We used to be workers that had a set of tasks that we did. Now we have to be customer-centric. We have to put the people we support at the centre. We have to drive organisational change for all our organisations. And we have many organisations, because of the way they were funded from the state, which was for service provision, not capital projects, that they have margins less than 3% and limited cash reserves to upgrade for this growth that's coming. This state invested very little in pre-planning for this sector. Most of the money, or any money for these sorts of things, were devoted to the exiting the car industry and also the defence industry. When I listen to my friends in defence, where they're talking $400 million for workforce reform, I get a bit envious, because there was a whole million by this state for the transition to an NDIS, and 25% of that went to a Melbourne-based consulting company. The workforce, our most important. You will see very shortly we are working with KWP on a marketing campaign, because we've got to attract millennials into our workforce in allied health and in disability support, and we have to be relevant to them. Our ads will be centred around a campaign, making a difference. People with disability will ask the young generation, are you good enough to work with me? And that's really what we're about. We need to attract people into the roles. One of the things that has really concerned me, having returned internationally, is our disabled workforce. We employ something like 3% of the 15 to 25 year age group with disability, and about 2.5% of people with disability in the 25 and above. Internationally, those figures are something we should be ashamed of. In Sweden alone, they have 28,000 people in employment in one company, and they do everything. The airport, they do IKEA, a whole range, and the US is better and the UK is better than our country, where people are not trained through school to actually work with us in employment. It's an untapped workforce in Australia and in South Australia. And I think there's an opportunity for South Australia to take the lead. We've had a pricing review because the NDIS design changes every moment. So the cost of doing business with the NDIS is enormous. And it is, because it's been set up by the Commonwealth government, who are not in the practice of being in service delivery, it makes administrative workload very burdensome. There has been some increases as a result of the McKenzie review, and there were a number of recommendations that were put in, but there's a long way to go. So we're still waiting for the base price to be reviewed. Now, the reason I raise this is once the prices are right, there will be nothing stopping the multinationals, once they work out where they can make profit, coming into this business. So we really do need to shape an NDIA, and particularly in this state, shape a sector of disability service providers that are viable, sustainable, and have the core purpose of what we're here about, which is making a difference in people's life, people with disability. And it is really disappointing when you see the investment that have made in other states into the growth in this sector, and when the governments in other states have got out of business, They have not allowed any interstate providers into the market, yet in South Australia we are inviting interstate providers to come into our market because there's a perception that we're not capable of stepping up to the mark, which is going to be an interesting dilemma because all the people that we employ, I don't see any of the interstate providers bringing employees from interstate into this state, which means it will become a very competitive workforce. So it's critical that the South Australian government commit to local providers to support them to transition and to grow and support and create the additional 6,000 jobs in the next 2 years. That'll be 1 in 5 new jobs. So I believe this is an exciting time for our sector. There's lots of challenges, but there's also lots of opportunities, and the opportunities extend beyond the disability sector. There is a huge need for a Human Services Subcommittee of Cabinet because we do industry and skills, trade. I have export craft furniture through our Horn company overseas. We link with education, we link with health, and there's a whole lot of interfaces that need to be worked through in this state. So I know that the time's limited. I'm quite happy to talk about anything that people want through the panel session, so I might just leave it there. I'm confident that we can really create a vibrant disability sector in this state without the need for interstate or multinationals to become part of it. We've got great capacity and we're very good at enriching lives of people with disability. Thank you.